Hello and welcome to my guide for painting Masters of the Universe Battleground Evil Forces Wave 6, which is Scorpia, Leech and a little mud monster. As you can see, the very first thing I've done is I've sprayed Leech and Scorpia with some matte white spray, and I've sprayed the mud monster with some matte black spray. Both these sprays are from Colourforge. We're going to start with Scorpia and all of the red, and for that we're going to use some Mephiston red. All of that red will then be washed with some Carroburg Crimson. And while that wash dries, I'm going to start on Leech, and for his skin I'm going to use some Auric Flesh. And that will receive a wash with some Corellia Greenshade. And while that wash is drying, we're going to start work on the mud monster. To begin with, we're going to use some Eshin Grey. This will be followed by a dry brush of Mechanica Standard Grey. Then another dry brush. This time it's a 50-50 mix of Mechanica Standard Grey and Dawnstone. Followed by Dawnstone just by itself. This of course will be followed by Admin Grey. And then lastly a little bit of Grey Sear as a much lighter dry brush. We're going to move back to Scorpia and we're going to dry brush the Mephiston red just to basically try and pick out all those lovely little bumps and lumps on her tail. This will be followed by a second dry brush, but this time it's of Evil Sun's Scarlet. This will be followed by a third dry brush, but this time we're going to use a 50-50 mix of Evil Sun's Scarlet and Wild Rider Red. Then Wild Rider Red just by itself. And then lastly a 50-50 mix of Wild Rider Red and Fire Dragon Bright for a very, very, very light dry brush, mostly aimed on her tail, on all those bumps. Moving back to Leech, we're going to relayer the Auric Hide by dry brushing it back on. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Auric Flesh and Nurgling Green. And then finally Nurgling Green just by itself. Moving on to any metal sections, we're going to start with a base coat of Leadbelcher. This will then be given a wash with some Nuln Oil. Once that wash is dried, I'm going to start with a first highlight of a 50-50 mix of Leadbelcher and Stormhost Silver. Now this will be followed by a second highlight, but this time it's just Stormhost Silver all by itself. And they're going to start working on the yellow part of Leech, and for that it's going to be Avalanche Sunset. This will then get washed with some Cassandora Yellow. While that wash dries, I'm then going to use some Mournfang Brown to paint Leech's belt. And past the ridiculous close-up of my knuckles, I'm using some Agrax Earthshade on that belt. Next, for the red symbols and his net, which is also going to be red, I'm going to use some Mephiston red. I'm then going to paint the inside of Leech's mouth and the mud monster's mouth with some Screamer pink. Then both the red and the pink will be washed with some Carroburg Crimson. Then going back to the yellow, I'm going to relayer the Avalanche Sunset. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Avalanche Sunset and Flash Gets Yellow. And then finally Flash Gets Yellow just by itself for an edge highlight. I'll then go back to the red and use a 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet for the first highlight. And follow that up with a second highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet just by itself. To paint the inside of the mouths, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Screamer Pink and Pink Horror. Then to work on the exposed teeth, I'm going to use a little bit of Wraithbone. And this will then get washed with some Army Painter Soft Tone. While that wash dries, I'm going to start working on the skin of Scorpia, and for that I'm going to use some Kislev Flesh. The skin will then be washed with some Reichland Flesh Shade. Once the wash on the teeth has dried, I'm going to go back to those, and I'm going to just relay the Wraithbone, taking care to avoid any of the recesses. And they'll then get a highlight with a 50-50 mix of Wraithbone and Matte White. Both their eyes are kind of an orange colour, so I'm just going to start with some Wild Rider Red. And this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Wild Rider Red and Fire Dragon Bright. And then lastly, Fire Dragon Bright just by itself, kind of like a bit of a pupil. Going back to Scorpia's skin, I'm going to relayer the Kislev flesh, taking care to avoid any of the recesses. I'll then give that a highlight with a 50-50 mix of Kislev flesh and Matte White. Try and use a little bit of water to thin it down a bit so it blends in with the rest of the skin. The skin out of the way, I'm going to use some Abaddon Black to paint her eyes. This will be followed by Matte White. And then finally, Abaddon Black again for the pupils. She's also got some sort of eyeshadow going on the pictures, and that looks like a bit of a green, so for that I'm just going to use a little bit of Auric Flesh. And then finally, I'm going to use some Screamer Pink to give her some lipstick. Going back to Leech's belt, I'm going to use some Mournfang Brown, and I'm simply going to relayer everything, trying to avoid any of the recesses. This will then be followed up with a 50-50 mix of Mournfang Brown and Scrag Brown. And then finally, Scrag Brown just by itself. To pick out the little dots or the rivets on the belt, I'm going to use some Storm Host Silver. I'm then going to paint the base with some Mournfang Brown, and then I'm going to give that a quick overbrush with some Scrag Brown. There's also some sort of vines or little things coming across the ground, so for that I'm just going to use some Deathweld Forest. I'm then going to paint the rims of the bases with some Abaddon Black. And paint the directional indicator with some Matte White. Then lastly, I'm going to wash the base with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. And once that washes dries, that's these guys finished. I've got to say, they're such a lovely pair of models. Archon Studios have done an absolutely fantastic job bringing all of these characters to life. They're so much fun to paint as well. And the best part is, they're really simple and really quick to paint. These guys only came in around about the 5-hour mark for all three. And as I said, it's an absolute joy to paint. And I hope you have as much fun painting these guys as I did. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this guide useful, please give the channel a subscribe, the video a like, and maybe a share to your fellow Masters of the Universe Battlegrounds players. There's also plenty of other games, systems on this channel as well, including stuff like Marvel Crisis Protocol and 40k if you want to check those videos out. All that's left to say, I guess, is goodbye for now. So thanks again, and goodbye for now.